morning. This is Bridget Talbot in my presentation on space practice for ELRC 7503. Space practice, also known as distributed practice or space repetition, is a study technique where students review material over a long period of time. So far, this has been the most interesting lesson for this class. For me, I chose space practice because it caught my attention when I was reading about all the instructional strategies. And then while doing some research on it and getting my slides and thoughts together, I realized that this is how I study. It's how I've always studied for years. And I didn't know it had a name until today. And I still use this technique for studying to keep up on trends and credits I have to maintain my designing. So I found it really interesting that I already do this and I just had no clue that it was anything special. And the power of spaced practice, mastering learning through time. So there's a science behind this type of practice. Shorter practice and study separated by a period of time typically improves retention compared to massed study in one long session. This is known as a spacing effect. The benefit to learning of including gaps between study and revision sessions. Spacing practice can improve students' long-term retention of their learning. Spacing is the practice of sequencing learning so that information is delivered across two or more lessons rather than just one. The science behind this type of practice is based on the idea that spreading out learning over time helps people learn and retain information better than cramming. So 4 reasons why spaced practice is effective. Brain consolidation. The brain forms connections between neurons to create a new network. And then resting and sleeping after learning helps the brain consolidate memories. The second thing is working memory. Cramming can deplete working memory resources. 4, retrieval practice. Retrieving info strengthens the natural pathways that support memory. Reconstruction. When we relearn something after a period of time, we reconstruct the information and the pathways that lead to it. Creating a spaced practice plan. So there's a few steps. Step 1, planning. Begin by mapping out regular intervals for study sessions. Determine when and how often the material will be visited. Step 2, study and review. Dive into the material for the first time. Engage with it through various learning strategies such as reading, note-taking, group projects, etc. Then review what you learned to summarize your initial understanding. Number 3, recall. Challenge students to recall the material they learned after the first learning session. This step promotes students to actively retrieve the information and strengthen their memory of the material. Step 4, continued recall. This is where planning is essential. Maintain a schedule of recalling the material at spaced intervals. Continuously revisiting the content reinforces students' understanding and commits it to their long-term memory. This step is where old information and new information are joined to create lasting connections. Of forgetting. What is the theory of forgetting? Identified by German psychiatrist Erwin Ebbinghaus, is the 1880s. In the 1880s, he found that within an hour of learning new material, people tend to forget up to 50% of it. Ebbinghaus discovered that new content is forgotten very rapidly over the first 24 hours after learning, but the rate of loss gradually slows over time. He categorized the factors affecting the quality of initial learning, making the information meaningful. This is usually presented as making real-world links or stressing the importance of a particular topic these days. The way it is presented to us, the delivery method must be engaging for the new learning to be memorable. If students aren't thinking about it, they aren't learning about it. The psychology actors, stress, sleep, hunger, etc., that may be distracting our thoughts. It is the quality of thought that influences the starting quality of the memory, not the strength of the experience. How much distraction is there in a room? How distracting is the task itself? How much thought is the student diverting from the content to something else? First hour, first review. At some point, probably towards the end of the lesson, is a good idea for the students to recap and review any new content you have covered that lesson. This action of revisiting is within an hour is the first step in slowing the rate that students will forget the new content. This could be as simple as a quick fire round of questioning answered on a whiteboard or an exit ticket exercise. The first day is the second review. A quick review built into the next lesson in some form will again refresh the knowledge, but more importantly, slow the rate of forgetting significantly. If you make a habit of using recall activities as your do now task to start the lesson, it is a good idea to reserve half of the activity for the content covered in the previous lesson. 1 week plus. Review number 3 is an ongoing periodic review. If you reserve half of each recall activity for content covered in the previous lesson, then the other half should be populated by a rolling cycle of content drawn from the previous weeks and months. The rate of forgetting will have slowed significantly by this point, but students will still forget unless they revisit topics over time. Introduce new information slowly and in small chunks. By understanding the common misconceptions surrounding space practice, learners can adopt more effective strategies for long-term mastery. Spaced practice is the exact opposite of cramming. The forgetting curve shows that people rapidly lose knowledge if they don't retrieve and revise it. The steepest drop happens within the first few hours, with people forgetting about 50% of new information within an hour and 70% within 24 hours. If you review material one day after learning it, then a week later, then a month later, you're much more likely to remember it long term. This is where the flipped classroom model and spaced practice work well together. Students learn material on their own and then use class time to apply the knowledge through interactive activities. Plan ahead. Plan your spaced learning schedule in advance so you know what to review each day. Read before bed. Reading something before going to bed can help you remember information. Get enough sleep. Your brain needs sleep to store memories. This method leverages the natural decline of forgetting curve by reinforcing memory just as it begins to fade. In conclusion, spaced practice is a study technique that involves spreading out learning lessons over time rather than cramming in one long session. The key to spaced practice is gradually increasing the gap between review sessions. Some techniques that you may benefit from is better recall, saves time, more effective learning, and better retention. And you can break up your study time, review material regularly, and create flashcards. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my presentation. Hope everyone has a great weekend and your football team wins whoever they're playing. Here is a list of my references that I used for this presentation.